Thank you for joining us on segment 2 of our Taylor's Falls walking tour. Starting here at Government Street and First Street, strolling down toward the river, look north to your left, across the parking lot. You'll notice an intriguing building with a little hat on the roof above. It's known as a belvedere, or a type of cupola. That interesting old Italianate building first began in 1853 as a Greek revival home for the area's first doctor, Lucius B. Smith. Dr. Smith eventually moved on to become a surgeon for the Union Army in the Civil War and died in action in 1864. But this grandiose home was later enlarged in the 1870s and redesigned into a so-called Italianate home by a Swiss saloon keeper and entrepreneur, Caspar Hauser. The home was originally built near the parking lot just below and northeast of the Memorial Community Center behind us, but was moved to its present site in 1932 after being stripped down to its nearly original size by a Norwegian immigrant named Elliot Martinson. He also added an entire west wing for it to become a home for his growing family. That little belvedere above, it was rebuilt in the mid-1980s, similar to its original design, and was originally meant to give the owners a spectacular view of the river valley and the city below. The present front porches were added in the 1990s when the whole building was lifted to have a new commercial space added below. Let's keep walking down toward the river, stopping at the corner of Bench Street. We're standing on the corner of Bench and First, with First Street being the city's main street for many years, back when the downtown was quite a bit larger than it appears today. Off to the southeast, about a mile downstream, on your right near the camping area of Interstate State Park, was an area known as Lowertown or Milltown that we referred to earlier. That was the original landing for trappers and traders from across the world, long before Wisconsin was a state, and Taylor's Place was the last stop on the St. Croix River before the falls, now lost with that hydroelectric dam upstream. Let's go back to that summer of 1838, when Ben Baker and Jesse Taylor arrived from Fort Snelling in Minneapolis to make a claim right here in the St. Croix River bank below. This is where the steamboat's journey also ended, as the falls kept river navigation from going any further upstream. But it was about 1 mile southwest of the downtown, in the Milltown Lowertown area, where much of the city's commerce and subsequent adventures began. Most of that early industry revolved around processing the growing cache of towering pine that carpeted the region upstream. Now, remarkably, a half dozen of those original structures from Lowertown still survive today, although they've since been moved, some outside of town, and one of them was even moved to Dresser, Wisconsin. Within the park area in Taylor's Falls are several historic stone structures using basalt rock, locally referred to as trap rock, such as the charming 1920s women's restroom, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. It's visible across the road to the right, just west of the 1950 Boat Tour building. Behind the women's restroom is a much smaller men's restroom, which park officials eventually plan to restore for use as a year-round restroom for hikers and rock climbers in the cold months. Even the parking lot is rich with history, as low stone walls made by Works Progress Administration and CCC workers show the hand-hewn work of another era. Artisans who used every piece of quarried and dynamited stone in a grand detail for future generations to enjoy. But the park is mainly known for its spectacular trails, its hikes, and its rich, unique history and ever-changing seasonal palette of colors and textures, with the river as both a recreational focal point and an original highway south for the seemingly endless supply of lumber harvested from the north. That lumber became a building block of train trestles, homes, and industry throughout the Midwest. It also led to one of the most famous events of the region, the famous log jams that piled millions of board feet of lumber hundreds of feet high on the river across. As an old-time reporter said, reports of the log jam have it so massive and unstoppable that professionals have begun to use dynamite and various explosives to assist in the breakup of the many hundred-foot-tall mountain of fallen trees, clogging the river with volumes of wood unseen. Photos of those massive log jams continue to marvel visitors today, and the pictures remain as another reminder of what made this area so special and tempting to both industry and logging. The scope of these mountainous log piles ironically led to an even broader expanse of tourism, as the reporters covering those very log jams took note of the area's remarkable beauty and passed along their impressions. So in a way, the log jams helped make the city what it is today. Let's continue north, to the left on down Bench Street to our next stop at the corner of Ravine Street. We ask that you look across the street. On the corner is that imposing red brick Ottawa Grill building. This two-story, current staple of the downtown was built in 1903. It replaced the Hauser Ellison building that was destroyed in the 1902 fire. In fact, the southern end of the Agrell was at one time another landmark structure of the downtown businesscape, the 1866 Hauser Ellison building, Originally a two-story saloon graced with a unique buff-colored Kasota limestone from southern Minnesota. That grand structure also sported a fancy belvedere above it to enjoy a view of the valley. In 1887, Smith Ellison had it remodeled into a three-story Second Empire-style building. That building was considered fireproof, which tends to be a recipe for disaster. That lost structure was constructed by the previously mentioned Swiss barkeeper Caspar Hauser. He raised some eyebrows with his painting choices of the tavern building's trim.
Caspar Hauser has painted the cornices and trimmings of his fine saloon a dark, gloomy, somber color. He should touch it up with something lively now, say a death's head and bones. It would give a pleasing and appropriate effect. Taylor's Falls Reporter, June 12, 1869.
As mentioned, that 1902 fire claimed the old Hauser Ellison and 18 other primary structures of the downtown. And the current Agrell was constructed shortly after, using much of the old Hauser Ellison land. Looking to the north of the Agrell, you'll see a one-story addition from 1965. Where the addition now stands, there used to be a small 1850s home, which was also destroyed in that roaring 1902 blaze. Fires have indeed sculpted the downtown of Taylor's Falls over the centuries, and as recently as 2002, fire continued to change the face of the city. Let's stop here in the corner of Ravine and Bench Streets and carefully cross to the east side of the street. Pause the player here to cross Bench Street. Welcome back to our walking tour. Pausing for a moment here on Bench Street, take a moment to view the hole once known as the Livery Mall. Once again, it was fire that consumed a giant slice of the city's history after a spectacular blaze on January 12, 2002. The blaze footage was a national news story, with firefighters from 11 departments in 2 states tackling that possessed fire, working to keep it from spreading across the downtown. The Livery Mall was originally constructed in 1869 by the 3 Winslow brothers to meet the expanding equestrian needs of the region, along with several other liveries. The building escaped destruction once before, in 1879, when a July 14th rainstorm swelled local ponds and creeks to many times their original size. One of those creeks runs underground, right below us. Spring Creek goes under Bench Street and east to the old stable spot. It was during that 1879 deluge that its sudden power opened giant chasms across Bench Street, consuming and swallowing in huge portions of the downtown. It may be hard to imagine a tiny, bubbling, romantic brook as a monstrous, ground-consuming torrent peeling away the city around it, but it was all too real. Water is both lazy and extremely destructive, and with that washout threat looming still, it led to a modern storm sewer and infrastructure project in 1999, meant to keep such an event from ever inflicting such destruction ever again. Well, the livery was eventually used for other purposes as the automobile flourished, and later became home to a popular department store in 1951 called Stop and Swap. Then in the 1970s, it was remodeled again into a number of smaller stores and renamed the Livery Mall in 1979. Let's continue to stroll down Bench Street to the north. Past the site of the old Livery Mall, you'll notice a brick-faced building, past the open space of the mall. That was originally a mercantile building from 1903, constructed by Hans Thone, a Norwegian immigrant who lost his previous store in that 1902 fire. During a modern renovation of that Thone building, workers even discovered some of the original markings and shelving from the displays. Take a pause here, if you will, and look up the hill to the west, to your left, for just a spell. Imagine, if you will, an old, winding dirt road snaking down from the bluff above. Now picture a truck without brakes careening down that crude, twisty gravel route of modern Ravine Street. That truck continued to pile on speed, gravity as its master, eventually plowing head first into the Hans Thone building beside you. It's exactly what happened in 1927, and one can only imagine the sudden horror of that scene, which ended tragically as a passenger in that truck perished a short time later. Continuing our stroll, to the north of the Thone building is the former post office addition constructed in 1936. Beside that is the historic 1867 Silas Humphrey building. First constructed as a general store, it's changed its appearance over the decades, but remains a staple of the Bench Street experience in the century since. Looking ahead again to the north, you'll see a craftsman-style bungalow building at 412 Bench Street, originally constructed in 1921 by a local lifetime railroad worker named Henry Sawson, again showing the importance of the rails to the city, not only for commerce, but for jobs and eventual growth within the city, leading to families being raised and the necessary supporting industry those families created. Beside the Sawson building to the north is a former 1854 warehouse, constructed by another European settler, British lumber worker John Daubney. He lived to the ripe old age of 103 years. That's still a rare feat, but even more rare in the 19th century, especially for a former lumber laborer who faced numerous threats to their life and limb. That old warehouse, it was remodeled in 1866 by Henry Newberry, and it was later rotated and later had porches and balconies added on over 100 years after its conversion. Looking across the street west, to your left, is the Marmon Memorial Parkway, named after former Mayor Glenn Marmon. His family had a rich history of military service, and one of his older brothers is one of the 5 soldiers the Memorial Community Center was dedicated after. That parkway or parking lot was also the site of a once flourishing 1912 creamery. It had several different names over the years, and most local towns had creameries for the important nearby dairy businesses, and Taylor's Falls was no exception. That structure was torn down in 1994. It's been a parking lot since. Framing the parkway to the south is the 1956 Harold Anderson Building, now known for its famous mural, painted in 2003 by local artist Christopher Young. That mural depicts a famous rock formation called the Devil's Chair. That spectacular guardian obelisk of the river was noted through the centuries, from trappers to settlers to early natives. The chair was one of the most recognized landmarks of the river valley, but has since been lost under extremely mysterious circumstances. Yes, gravity can be nudged to do devilish work, and while investigators lean toward blaming gravity, there's a strong case to be made for vandalism behind the chair's tumble. Some people doubt the suddenness of the event and believe there would have been earlier hints or slight movements of the chair over the years. Investigators admit that hydraulic equipment may have been used, and evidence of paint marks and chipping suggests it's quite possible, but cannot be proven either way. Regardless of the cause, the mystery may never be solved, but the chair's collapse is a solemn reminder of the constantly changing face of the valley, and the juggernaut river that first created the chair continues to carve a path through the rock below where we walk. Looking across the parkway to the north is the 1987 Robert Anderson Building. It's a neo-Gothic revival originally built as a fudge shop. Yes, food and drink have always been an important part of downtown Taylor's Falls. That culinary fascination continues today with a bevy of local eateries, taverns, and specialty food shops, which we heartily encourage you to explore. Also take note of that charming 1854 CV barn. It's behind the Anderson Building to the west. That vintage barn is a reflection of a simple 1850s urban design. Beside the Daubney-Newberry Building to the northeast is a composite of several portions of the old 1920 Anderson Lumber Company storage building. That core structure has since been removed, but the surviving portions and additions have also been remodeled and added onto. But it was there that a part of the now international Anderson Window Company got its roots. Now based in Bayport, Minnesota downstream, the company has grown to become an international powerhouse of building construction and had part of its roots right here with the Anderson Lumber operation. Looking to the northeast on the right, partially obscured by trees, is the handsome Munch Ruse home. That grand 1854 Greek Revival home at 190 2nd Street is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was constructed by the Munch family from Germany, who lived there until 1867. The home showcases a vintage yellow ochre color of the era, noted for its longevity and affordability over costly white paints of the time. Many homes of the era still show evidence of that pleasant hue. The Silas Humphrey family lived there until 1874, when Oscar Roos bought the grand home. Roos was one of Minnesota's first Swedish settlers and truly a celebrated resident and prominent local leader. In fact, his death in 1896 was big news around the city and was met with great sorrow across the region. Oscar and Anna Roos were involved in many local investments and became decidedly wealthy from their ventures, allowing them to help and establish many local people and businesses. The couple had 5 children, 3 of whom were born in that historic home. Their third child, Charlie, was born in 1877. He went on to become a prominent lyricist and poet, along with his wife, Juanita Thompson. But Charlie was also known in his youth as a cutting-edge illustrator, as evidenced by his cartoon drawings from textbooks of his school days, which have a timeless style and show amazing talent. Let's pause here at the railing for a moment. It's also a chance to pursue a different tour on your own, if you're so inclined. You may want to follow 2nd Street to the east, down and to the right to the beautiful Riverwalk, which meanders above the St. Croix River, across a modern-day timber bridge at Spring Creek, and under the U.S. Highway 8 bridge to Interstate State Park and back downtown. That trail highlights the river below and offers spectacular and scenic views of both the river and the 2 cities above. We highly recommend that detour as well. That concludes segment 2 of our tour. Thank you for joining us on our walking tour of Taylor's Falls. Segment 3 begins ahead to the north across 2nd Street at the corner.